Hi everyone, this is Daniel,
And I'm June,
and we are
Korean.
American.
Hey, Daniel.
Hey June,
Welcome back to part two,
part two.
but it has absolutely no connection to the first part.
Our more observant watchers might note we're wearing the exact same clothes,
Hmm.
so you'll know that we recorded this on the same day. Yeah, June, I have often alluded to this topic.
Hmm.
I don't think I told you this. I'm trying to listen to every episode before we do our final recordings.
Aw.
And I realized I did allude to these people and this person in particular a lot, but we never actually got to dedicating an episode
Hmm.
to them.
Mm.
But yeah, here we are today, and I wanted to dedicate this episode to grandmothers in general, but in
Mm.
particular my two Halmonis
Mm.
that really raised me. So
Mm. Yeah. Well, so I think you did mention recording a Halmoni episode, but I always thought it was just like Halmonis in general.
mm,
It was only recently that I knew that you wanted to dedicate it to your own Halmonis.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I did want to talk about Halmonis in general.
Hmm.
I will say one of the biggest regrets I have, I don't have many for my time here,
Hmm.
but one of the biggest ones is when I first moved here, June, one of the things I really wanted to do
Hmm.
was spend a lot of time with my grandma, who is still alive in Seoul, and just record as much audio and video of her
Hmm.
life as possible.
Hmm.
Get her telling stories about myself when I was a baby, my dad, who is her oldest son, all my uncles and aunts, cousins, etc., and just like get as much digital archive footage of her and her talking about her life as possible, and eventually, create some sort of just a very brief documentary type thing just to like, archive her life.
Hmm.
And I the first few times I met with her, I tried, but I never. It always felt a little bit forced and
Hmm.
honestly a little bit self-serving.
Hmm.
Every time I either pulled out the mic or set up like a camera to
Oh,
record,
you even went to that extent.
not like this mic, but I got like a little voice recorder.
Mm.
And I think at one point I said, like, Appa, can you just maybe every day
Yeah.
just ask a question from this list of questions and
Hmm.
record Halmoni answering them?
Hmm.
And, a month passed and I was like, oh, Appa, how many times have you recorded? He's like, sorry, I don't think of it.
Ah.
And he never said it, but I got the sense that he didn't want to do it.
Mm.
And yeah, even when I was there in person, I tried to set up my phone to record and whatever. It always felt so forced and wrong. I think in hindsight, it's like I realized the time I had with her
Mm.
still remaining, right? It was almost so sacred that I didn't want to pollute it
Mm.
by, getting out a phone, getting out a recorder, asking her these questions that felt a little bit forced. Even if I was genuinely curious,
Mm.
and even, maybe the one time I did try, after like 15 minutes, she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so tired. I need to go lie down."
Mm.
Or she would stop and say like, why are you asking me this again? Like, what do you want to know? I don't really remember that well.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I don't have too much about my grandma, but what I do have is I did ask my dad recently, just a couple weeks ago. I've asked him this so many times, but I think for context, he just left Korea about a month ago.
Mm.
And my grandma's 102 years old, and her health has been up and down, like every person I think that age. But I really got the sense that my father thought this was the last time he was going to spend time with his mother.
Mm.
So I think in general, he's in a more reflective and contemplative mood. So maybe this time he finally did actually answer my questions, and he spent some time and sent me an email with some details about his mother's
Oh,
life.
really?
Yeah, so I know a little bit more about her.
Wait, but can I ask you a very fundamental question?
Yes.
Why were you so interested in preserving this person's life to begin with?
Yeah, yeah, this is a great question. I think it's, for one, I'll say I'm surprised that, not to put you on the spot,
Mm.
but you and my cousins and everyone else I know who grew up in Korea
Mm.
really doesn't care that much
Mm.
about their grandparents' story, life, all the details.
Mm.
And I think it's the thing you always say as immigrants, right? When I'm grew up, born and raised in the US,
Mm.
I don't know Korean culture. I don't know Korean history.
Mm.
Like I have to rely on these stories and anecdotes. And in a sense, because I'm not, white American,
Mm,
I don't feel like I'm totally accepted as American. And so I guess I'm looking for a sense of community, belonging.
mm,
And I think a lot of that comes from, my Korean side.
mm-hmm.
And so let me connect as much with my Korean ancestry and history as much as possible.
Ah, I see.
And I think also, I want to actually know your thoughts on this. I don't think I've ever asked you this. The immigrant story, right? The American dream.
Mm,
I have so much pride in it.
mm,
Sorry. Like I don't know if I ever shared my father's story in detail.
mm,
Maybe he's still too young. That's what he would tell me. He's like, I'm still too young. I have a lot of life left to live. Maybe when I'm older, I'll put it all down in words for you. But the bits and pieces I've known, like this is not about my dad. I guess what I'm saying is I know how hard it was for that generation of immigrants to move to America,
mm.
make something for themselves, and also, build a better life for my generation. And I've benefited so much from it. I'm so grateful for it. And so I think I definitely want to know more about, I think, how hard it was for my father, but also for my grandmother, because I'm a product of, because really I'm the like beneficiary of June, all that sacrifice and the turmoil and struggle and poverty that they went through, not only, during Japanese occupation, then the Korean War, then immigrating to the US, and then making that life for us there. So yeah, I think that's why I'm like, I think a lot of immigrants are very curious about their ancestry because of that. Not only because they're disconnected from it, but because they know that their parents and grandparents had it so much harder than they did.
Mm.
And I think they want to know so that they can truly feel the benefit and gratitude and being appreciative of that. But yeah, I'm curious for you because like you grew up, you were born in a rich Korea. Like, of course, Korea still developed, but like this is what you have lived in. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm,
So maybe the past doesn't seem so far off or
mhm,
so different.
mhm,
But I'm curious how you think and relate, how curious you are about your parents' and grandparents' life and story. Like, how did you get to be who you are?
mhm,
Yeah, as a non-immigrant, right? Like you have many, many generations of Korean heritage
mhm,
that you're living in, so it's very close for you.
mhm.
Whereas in America, it's very far for me.
I see. I so I guess the main difference is that sometimes I'm also kind of curious about my parents' life or my grandparents' life as well, but it's always focused on their personal lives and doesn't have a connection to, like idea of culture or heritage
Oh,
because I'm just living here, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah.
it's not something different, right?
Hmm.
I do something very similar where every time like I go home for Chuseok or
Hmm.
Seollal
Hmm.
and we have like a family dinner or gathering and there's like my grandmother, sometimes there's my uncles or aunts. I just have my recording on
Hmm.
and I don't tell them because I just want to record the most natural
Yeah.
conversations. And but it's never because I want to know the culture or like the history. I'm just curious about like the factual things
Mm.
about like their personal lives. So I think that's maybe probably the difference.
Oh,
And
yeah.
another question that I had is like, why is it your grandmother specifically,
Mm.
or like what is very special about grandmothers and not maybe grandfathers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think personally, and I'll share more later on this in this episode,
Mm-hmm.
but it was my maternal grandmother who actually really raised me day to day,
I
right? She
see.
was the one who picked me up from the bus stop, dropped me off, made me snacks. I think my mom and dad still did most of the cooking for dinner,
Mm-hmm.
but during summer break when my grandma was my guardian at home, right? My
Mm-hmm.
parents were both working. And so I think out of I don't know if this is like the wrong thing to say, but I always felt deeply loved by my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of maybe Asian immigrant children will have this, can relate.
Mm-hmm.
My parents had a very high bar, academically. They
Mm-hmm.
had very high expectations for me. And I think parents in general have this responsibility to, raise good kids, if that makes sense, right?
Mm,
And, have successful careers and happy lives where I think grandparents are the ones who are very free to just like love you.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you do. Sorry. And so I think grandmas are the ones, or grandparents in general, are the
Mm,
ones who are just very free to just like love you for who you are, no
mm,
strings attached, no expectations.
mm,
And so, yeah, I think it was really, Jun, I was actually a part of my pre, we call it premarital counseling.
mm,
So you meet with the pastor before you get married.
mm,
Their job is to make sure, oh, this couple is like a good fit. It's not, they're talking through the difficult issues
mm,
that are necessary for a successful marriage. But yeah, I remember I was like 29 or 30. And that was the first time I ever realized, like, oh my God, like my grandma really exhibited like unconditional love for me.
mm,
Where, don't get me wrong, I know my parents love me,
mm.
but it always felt conditional. Like,
Um,
oh, if you get good grades,
yeah.
if you listen, if you don't
Mm,
embarrass us, if you
mm,
make us proud, then we'll love you.
yeah.
But there were no strings attached with my grandma. So I think it's very specifically my maternal grandma.
Mm,
And then I think maybe for my father's side, my dad just talks so glowingly about his own mother.
mm,
Whereas I think, he'll tell me a lot about his dad too. But as far as like character and personality of my grandfather, it's like, oh, he was very strict.
mm,
And so I just think, at least in my family history,
mm,
the mothers were the ones who had a lot more responsibility and impact, I think, on the kids from again, day-to-day care, personality, character, all those things.
mm,
Whereas, I think the fathers are just typically expected to work and provide financially.
mm,
So
mm,
don't get me wrong. I feel like deep gratitude and love for my father and mother too,
mm,
and I would love to talk about them at some point
mm,
in a way to honor what they did.
mm,
But for me, it's like the grandmothers are the ones that I felt again deeply and unconditionally loved by.
mm.
So
Do you want to go into more depth into their lives?
yeah, so I wanted to dedicate an episode to them. Maybe I'll just go one by one
Mm-hmm.
and just share. I would love to hear from you as I'm sharing, like what similarities you feel with your grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And also use this as a chance to just talk about that generation.
Mm.
I think, yeah. So let me just do that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Again, by the way, my grandma's still alive. She is, I think, 102 years old,
Mm.
101. According to ChatGPT, one of like I think 5 to 8,000 centenarians, so people 100 or older, living in Korea.
Oh, 5 to 10,
5 to 8,000, I
five
believe,
to eight
is the
thousand.
estimate.
Wow.
So she's one of the few oldest people in Korea. Her name is An Byung-bu. She was born February 1926. And then my dad notes it's December 1925 by the lunar calendar.
Mm.
I don't know. What does that mean to you?
It's just the same day, but in a different calendar.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it
But old people used to celebrate their birthdays in the lunar calendar.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Uh,
not that it's a different day though, is what I'm
I
saying.
clearly don't know how the lunar calendar and solar calendar work.
Yeah. So there's a corresponding day in the lunar calendar in any solar calendar.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's very far off. Anyway,
Yeah.
her birthplace was 평안북도 sakju.
Mm.
Do you know, does that do anything for you?
Pyeongbukdo is an area in North Korea,
Okay, okay.
but
I did know North
I don't
Korea.
recognize the city.
Mm. Her parents were An Ji-sik and Kim Chan-sil. So her dad was An Ji-sik and mother was Kim Chan-sil.
Mhm.
Do those names sound old to you?
Well, first of all, your grandmother's name sounds very old to
An
me.
Byung-bu.
Yeah, because I think old people used to name people just by the meaning of the Chinese character
Mm.
and not the way that it
Yeah,
sounds.
they didn't care about how it
Yeah,
sounded.
so
Yeah.
when you hear old people's names, it's like, oh, they just didn't care at all about how it sounds, but it must have a wonderful meaning.
Meaning,
Yeah.
yeah. My Halmoni was the oldest and had three younger brothers.
Hmm.
I won't go through their names. My dad says Halmoni does not have much fond memories of her father,
Mm.
but she has the utmost affection and respect of her mother.
Mm.
Apparently, she was very good looking, kind, and very dedicated.
Her mother, your
Yeah.
grandmother's mother.
Yes. So my great grandmother,
Do you know what you call your great grandmother in Korean?
Wang Halmoni. Is that not it?
No.
Oh, that's what I tell my kids to call their great
I mean,
grandmother.
that's an informal way.
Okay.
증조 할머니.
Ah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yes. Jungjo Halmoni. This is a story my grandma has told me many times.
Hmm.
At the end of one school year, there was a graduation and award ceremonies, and my grandmother and all of her brothers all got first place in the class awards,
Hmm.
and it made my great grandmother very, very, very proud.
Hmm.
After elementary school, she went to 신의주 남고등여학교.
Hmm.
And then after graduation, she came back to Sakju and became a school teacher for 1 year before she got married.
Oh, she came back to her hometown.
Yep. And she
Hmm.
was a school teacher for 1 year.
Hmm.
And it was a family arranged marriage.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm pretty sure, let me just do the math, but I'm pretty sure she was 19 years old when she had my father.
Mm.
Yeah, which I think was quite common back then.
Or even old.
Oh, I don't think do you think so?
Yeah.
Let me make sure that's right. So my 45, yeah. So she was 19 years old when she had
Mhm.
my father. So yeah, just before the Korean War broke out, so my Harabuji moved to south of the 30th parallel at the advice of his older sister.
Hmm.
And my grandma apparently moved a little bit later with my dad on her back. And so my dad was about 1 year old at the time.
Mm.
And actually, yeah, this is one place where I do have one audio recording of my grandma telling the story. But again, I think she was traveling with my 1 year old dad on her back. And there was some point at which she had to basically, pay someone or bribe someone to get on a boat.
Hmm.
And I think they were hiding on the boat, but my dad's won.
Hmm.
And so basically, she was so scared that my dad would make a sound. She was covering his mouth, right? As like guards came by, inspectors came by. And she, again, is a very devout Christian. So she credits her faith in God to helping it get through. But she said she was so afraid of him crying that she was struggling to decide, do I keep my hand over his mouth and nose, like, so he doesn't make any noise? Because if he makes a noise, he die. But if I strangle him, he also dies. And just kind of like puts you in that perspective of like how life or death things really did feel back then. So when the Korean War broke out, the family moved to Daejeon first, and then June. Where did they go after that? Daegu.
Oh,
So actually, we have some shared history here.
I think that's a common route
Yeah.
that people took
Uh,
because Daegu was the last city to defend.
yeah. So actually, that's my dad filled that in later.
Hmm.
Like they were in Daejeon. The reason they moved to Daegu
Yeah.
was actually the north was advancing,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
they had to go even further south.
Hmm.
So I mean, like they really again lived during the war. So my dad said when the Korean War ended with the ceasefire, the family moved to Incheon시,
Hmm.
Galsandong,
갈산동.
and stayed there until my 할아버지 retired.
Hmm.
And then when he retired, he did move to Seoul, and they've been living there ever since in the Shingomo area.
Hmm.
And so that was what my dad emailed me. But then I filled in some more details, which I want to run through really quick. My grandma's mom went to Seodan. I don't know what that means.
It's a old community school.
Community school.
Yeah.
The way my dad phrased it was like it was only for boys and men back then.
Mm.
But my great grandmother was just like kind of spying outside, learning along with them, even though she wasn't formally allowed to go in.
Hmm.
But because she was kind of good with the abacus, good with math, she was recruited to do some random bookkeeping work. While they were living in Daejeon, so actually, again, my grandmother's younger brother was also very, very bright. He actually went to college in Pyongyang. But of course, he was recruited to be a North Korean army officer. He had no ability or chance to leave. So basically, all three brothers, I understand, they had to live in North Korea, but my grandmother was able to go south. And I think while they were living in Daejeon, that brother made a call to my grandma, basically trying to figure out some way to send money to her. But then the telephone operator cut the call, according to my dad, because again, someone was listening in on the conversation. And according to my dad, this was the last time my grandmother ever got to talk to any of her brothers. So this would have been during the wartime, right? They hadn't moved to Incheon yet, so sometime between like 1945 and 1950. And so, yeah, not being able to live for the last 70 years talking to your brothers because of this. And there was all those like trying to set up meetings between
Yeah.
siblings separated by the war. I think around 2000. So I do think my grandma did apply for that, but yeah, she ended up realizing it was basically hopeless.
Oh, there was a very famous TV show
Yeah.
that started 1983.
Oh, 83. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
by KBS called 이상가족을 찾습니다. And I think it's on the Guinness World Record for the longest running live
Oh,
broadcasting.
yeah, they were reconnecting siblings or family that
Yeah.
that got separated by the war, right?
Mhm.
So maybe that's what they were talking about. But I do know, according to my dad, she tried once or twice, but just gave up because she felt like it was impossible to actually make that connection. My grandfather, so Harboji, he worked for the former Korean electric company, Joseon Electric, and eventually it combined with another company to become Korean Electric. But yeah, I've these pictures of my grandfather working in front of like massive electric substations. Also, yeah, one thing my dad, I think this was in Daejeon, he said they had these huge wire walls, but they electrified them at night, basically to prevent the North from advancing.
Oh,
But my dad has very vivid memories of, yeah, people his age climbing up, getting electrocuted and dying.
oh,
So it's just one of those things that like, man, that generation just lived with life and death all the time. My dad said when they moved from Daejeon down to Daegu because the army was advancing, he has a distinct memory of like sitting on top of a train boxcar. Like it was just so full, but he was like literally just the only seat he had was on top. And he said every time they went through a tunnel, they had to like squat.
yeah.
And it was just like covered in filth and dirt, but that was the only way they could go down. He said Daegu was very, very difficult. Actually, my grandma was, just selling things in front of some other big store, just trying to make any money that they could. And again, I don't know if this is okay to share. Apparently, my grandfather was trying to be conscripted to join the army, but my father suspects that the medical examiner had some compassion on him when he found out he's the only one supporting like this whole big family, and so they like let him not get conscripted.
Oh,
But again, my grandmother will credit that to to God and the miracle. But my dad thinks it was just like some humanity in that medical examiner making kind of a moral decision to let my grandfather not serve, or sorry, not get conscripted. Yeah. Anyway, I think the rest is more about my dad than my grandma, so I'll stop there. I do. I think one thing that also is so interesting to me, my sister, I've said this before, she's very good at Japanese. And so when she meets with my grandparents, my grandfather's passed away a while ago, but my grandma, they actually talk in Japanese still. So somehow, 70 plus years later, her Japanese is still good enough to talk to my sister in Japanese. And my sister has this recording of like my grandma singing this children's song in Japanese. It's like all this like elementary and middle school. Her life was in Japanese. She had a Japanese name. Everything was in Japanese, but it's still there enough for her to speak it. I don't know. It's just it's so crazy to me what my grandma's generation had to go through
my grandmother also used to sing those children's songs.
in Japanese.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't believe I mentioned this before, but again, when I was, I think, 18 months old, I lived with my grandma and grandfather in Shingomo for, I have to check my old passport. I did find it at one point. I think it was 9 to 12 months. Yeah. Originally, I thought it was 18 months, but I think I checked the passport and I was like, no, mom, my entry exit, it was only 12 months, not 18.
12 months from when you were 18 months
18
old.
months old. So I came here when I was 1.5, and then I left when I was 2.5.
Why was that?
It was just too difficult for my two working parents with two young kids to have a third very young kid.
I see.
Yeah. And, I often wonder, like, how did that 1 year at a young age being apart from my parents impact me? And I mentioned before on a podcast episode, like, maybe this is why I feel like maybe more affinity for my Korean culture and heritage
Maybe.
than my brother and
Mm,
sister because I
mm,
lived here for a year when I
mm,
was young.
mm,
But yeah, I will say like again, I have no recollection of that time, of
mm,
course.
mm,
And yeah, I have zero ill will against my parents for leaving me here.
mm,
If anything, I feel like I was probably very, very well loved and taken care of by my
mm,
grandparents.
mm.
But yeah. Okay. Any thoughts about my grandma's story that you've heard?
I yeah, I think I never asked about the my grandparents' lives in this depth,
Mm.
but I while listening to your story, I think because my family are very traditionally from Daegu or the Gyeongnam area or
Uh-huh.
slightly lower, so I think their lives is very different in that they didn't have to go to do the like fleeing
Mm.
to go to other places, I guess. And so I thought that was very interesting because if you think about it, everyone who lived outside of that area should have, flee to that Daegu area at
Mm.
one point. And also, I don't know. I sometimes feel like there could be a bit more celebratory color in the immigrant story or the Korean history too.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's always this, lingering sadness.
Yeah.
And I do agree, and I can't even imagine the hardship that they would have gone through. But I
Mm-hmm.
also do think that there were a lot of happy memories or like very celebratory moments as well.
Mm-hmm.
I have mixed feelings
Uh,
of like, why does it have to always be so sad,
yeah.
right? I think it should be celebrated even more. And I think a lot of them lived very happy lives too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the couple thoughts that came to mind.
I also feel the sense of that generation was kind of ashamed or doesn't like to talk about their history because of it.
Hmm.
And maybe this is like Han adjacent or why Koreans are too focused maybe on the more sad parts of it.
Yeah.
But I agree, like knowing despite all the tragedy, like
Hmm.
how they were able to survive and
Hmm.
that resilience
Hmm.
and like what they've been able to create and make for themselves, like
Hmm.
not only in my family, but
Yeah.
Korea as a country, right?
Hmm.
I do think there is so much to celebrate along
Yeah.
with that.
Mm.
Yeah. But I definitely don't want to ignore all the sad parts of it,
Oh
right? It's
yeah, of
just so
course.
tragic in
Hmm.
my mind.
Hmm.
But, in a sense, this is why my dad is so anti-war.
Hmm.
It's because like he grew up in it. Like he saw firsthand how horrible it is. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah. Anyway, my grandma is I still, I see her here and there. Our conversations are literally 30 seconds on the phone. In person, it's like 5 minutes is long now
Hmm.
because I just say hi, hold her hand.
Hmm.
She apologizes every time the same way. It's like, oh, I can't do anything for you. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
Just you can stay here for a little bit, eat whatever you want to go, right? I'm
Hmm.
just gonna go rest on the bed.
Hmm.
So, her day-to-day life now, she just kind of is pretty much lying down, I'd say 95% of the time.
Hmm.
Maybe more.
Hmm. Hmm.
But, her five children are all still alive, which I think is incredible. Everyone calls in regularly just to say hi and touch base. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
I think one of the common sentiments that I get from Halmonis is that they're always worrying about some, and I think that's their way of caring for you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's common amongst most Korean Halmonis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time I go to Daegu,
Yeah.
and my parents are now living with my Halmoni, my mother's side Halmoni, and she's always still very like worrying.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Are
oh,
you eating?
yeah.
Yeah.
And even though I'm like in the very, very same physique, she always says like, "Oh, 너무
Yeah, you look like you
말랐다."
lost weight.
Yeah.
Eat more. Yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. I think that's pretty universal across all Halmonis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I have to bring up one thing before I move on to
Hmm.
my maternal grandma.
Hmm.
My grandma is like awkwardly obsessed with looks still.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Like her for herself too. Like whenever we come over, she's like brushing her hair, like she's like, "Oh, how do I
Aw.
look? Am I still pretty?" Which I think is quite cute and endearing.
Yeah.
But then when she meets my family and kids, because she can't see, she really just sees like vague, I think, blobs.
Hmm.
So she doesn't know how my kids look,
Mm,
but she's always asking like, "Oh, how pretty are they? Are they pretty? Are they handsome?
mm,
Are they good looking? Are my grandkids good looking?"
mm,
Which I want to like I don't know why she values that so much,
mm,
right?
mm,
I wonder if it's something from that generation, maybe it's specific to my grandma, maybe because she was, pretty, she puts more value into it.
mm.
But they're always asking like how good looking are my kids, my grandkids.
Maybe it's because maybe she can't
Uh,
see, and that's like the
yeah.
most instinctive thing that she wants to
Oh, that's
see.
true. Maybe
Yeah,
that's the one thing she can't know herself,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But she's not asking, are they smart? Are they doing well in school? Do they have friends? She was like, oh, are they good looking? But that doesn't resonate with you. Like, are your grandparents oddly
Uh,
obsessed with looks?
no,
Okay.
not really.
Okay,
I
okay,
think
okay.
that's like a personal character.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I do I think it's very endearing, especially when old people are like very into looks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They still want to look good.
And I think that's kind of
Mm.
cool actually. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They still have some pride in themselves, maybe.
Cause in my mind, the default for old people is that they don't really care about how they
Hmm,
look.
hmm, hmm.
And so when they do, I think it's very endearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's cute when she does it. Like I see her brushing her
Mm-mm.
hair. She can't even see herself, right?
Yeah.
So it's like kind of fumbling, but yeah. Okay. I want to move on to my maternal grandma.
Hmm.
But yeah, for this June, it will be very straightforward. She passed away in 2008.
Hmm.
And so, in hindsight, this was kind of a bit of a turning point in my life
Hmm.
where I really started to think more about my future and what I want for myself.
Hmm.
And yeah, but I wanted to read just the I wrote a Facebook note. God, this is how old it is. Facebook Notes was a product. It was like basically blogs on Facebook.
Hmm.
But I wrote a blog after basically I typed up the eulogy that I said for her at her funeral
Hmm.
and I typed it up and shared it. So I just want to read this for us. And I will not get emotional. Yeah, I'll start here. My grandmother's funeral was a week and a day ago. Like I've told people, I'm not depressed and don't really feel overwhelmed by sadness or anything like that. When I think about her and how, oh God, it's ridiculous. Ah, so dumb. Jim, it's a curse.
Should I read it for you?
Maybe. Yeah, but then it might be embarrassing. Like I've told people, I'm not depressed and don't really feel overwhelmed by sadness or anything like that. When I think about her and how she won't be there, maybe you need to read it. When I go home for Thanksgiving this year, or how she won't be there to see me get married, I get a little sad. I gave a short eulogy at her viewing and wanted to get it out on paper what I said before I forget it. When I think of my grandmother, I am constantly amazed by what a woman of faith she was. When I would spend hours in my chair in front of the computer, she would always ask me, how can you sit there for so long? Doesn't your butt get tired? But when I said, Grandma, you spend all day sitting on the floor reading the Bible, doesn't your butt get tired? She would explain that old people can do that, but young people should not.
Mm.
She had this old Bible she would be reading constantly. The only way to describe it is dilapidated. It had a black cloth cover because the original cover was totally worn out.
Mm.
I remember she had to keep a rubber band around it so the pages wouldn't fall out,
Mm.
even though the binding had been glued back together time and time again. The pages were so thin that I thought if I breathed on them too hard, they would turn to dust in my hands. And yet, for the amount of use it got, it was in remarkably good condition. I can't imagine any human reading the Bible more than my grandmother. June, I used to read this regularly, by the way. I haven't read this in like maybe 5 years, so. On any given Sunday, I would drive my grandma and myself to church, but since her service started earlier than mine, I would usually be running late. My grandmother would always do two things to get me to hurry up. First, she would be dressed and ready with her handbag and everything by the time I woke up. By the time I ate breakfast and was getting ready to shower, she would already be outside, standing by my car door, smiling at me when I looked. Second, she would always remind me how much she loved being at church. Church is my favorite place to be. What better place is there in the world? She would say. Or, I wouldn't even mind being 30 minutes early to church this week. It was the blizzard of 96. Before she found out church service had been canceled that Sunday, my grandmother was outside with a shovel, plowing 4 feet of snow off the driveway, ready to do whatever it took to get to church. She was 83 years old. That's crazy. I mean, she was the strongest. I think at 80, my grandma was stronger than my mom, who was 50. Like, she was just so strong physically. And I guess reading this, June, like, this was given to a church congregation,
Mm.
so it was very focused on church. But I can also say, like, church was my grandma's life.
Mm-hmm.
So after my service ended on Sundays, I would go find my grandmother and say we had to go home. She would be with the other grandmothers and members of the Korean ministries, and they would say, "Oh, Mai, is that your grandson?" They would ask her. Yeah, she would reply, "Wow, he's so grown up." And I would think, I'm grown up, and out of anybody in the whole world, my grandmother is the one person who has seen it all happen. As far as I am concerned, some 20 years ago, my grandmother flew halfway across the globe, leaving the only country and people she had ever known to raise me so that both my parents could work.
Mm.
She was there when I was in kindergarten. I remember, since I didn't know how to ride a bike, she would have me sit down on my older brother's bike and just push me all the way to school. After school ended, sure enough, there she was with the bike, ready and waiting to push me back home. I remember in elementary school, my grandmother would be waiting for me at the bus stop every single day, and if it was raining, she'd only have one umbrella. She would hold it over my head as I walked in front of her, totally oblivious of the rain pouring down on her, so long as I was dry. And as soon as I got off the bus, I would hand my book bag over to her, carefree and happy, and run home as she walked behind me carrying it for me. I never considered that my book bag wasn't always light, or that my grandma was well into her 80s and supposed to be old and fragile. At dinner, she would always tap me, point to the tastiest dish on the table, telling me to eat more of it. When I got dressed for my senior prom, my grandmother also put on her quote-unquote fancy clothes so that we could take a picture together. She was there for my high school graduation. She was there when I graduated college, even though she got extremely carsick and the drive to Pittsburgh was 4 hours long. Never once in my life did I hear her complain. Growing up, I was never spoiled by material possessions or even personal freedom, but I was definitely spoiled by my grandmother's love for me, and that's far more than I deserved. It is extremely easy for me to forget how smart and intelligent my grandmother was. She was college educated, which for a woman in Korea during that time was very rare. She somehow managed to pass the US citizenship test, answering all the questions, both written and oral, in English, without really knowing the language at all. She would frequently write in to the local Korean newspaper and have her comments published. She was also a phenomenal storyteller, something I found out far too late. She made her own clothes, loved to garden, and could somehow turn any scrap of paper or cloth into something useful. I could go into how my neighborhood friends always told me she was the friendliest person they had ever met, even though they couldn't understand a word of what she was saying, or how all the other grandmothers in my neighborhood always wanted to be around her. The truth is, I don't know, and will never know, all the amazing things about my grandmother's life. At the viewing, so many people said things like, "Your grandmother was the best person in the world. I know this firsthand." From what I can piece together, she ran an orphanage in Korea, in that island, Baengnyeongdo. Before the war forced her to lose everything, and she spent years taking care of her sick mother-in-law. Of everything I have learned and gotten from my grandmother, the greatest thing for me is her living example of unconditional love. I never felt that I had disappointed her. But I also never once felt that I impressed her either. What I mean is that I don't think it mattered to her what I did or didn't do. Nothing would have caused her to love me any less, and it was not possible to love me any more. Her love and support and smile and being was just a given. As I grow older, I learn more and more to appreciate just how amazing this is. Maybe when I'm a parent or grandparent myself, I will understand. And when that time comes, if I can love even 10% of how my grandmother loved, I will consider it a success.
In loving memory, Shin Young-ha, born January 20th, 1915, and she passed away August 23rd, 2008. Another thing, June, I regret, I really wanted to make the trip to Baengnyeongdo,
Mm-hmm.
like that military island,
Mm-hmm.
but a part of me didn't want to go without my mom
Mm-hmm.
because I think going together would have been even more special. And then whenever again my mom's here, it just seems like I don't know, a bit self-serving.
Mm-hmm.
Like my mom doesn't seem as interested as me. And then my when my parents are here, they're here to take care of my grandmother, right? So it's like we flew here to be with her, but we're leaving her to do this thing for ourselves. You know, if and when my grandma passes away, maybe my mom and I will make that trip.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I know far far less about my maternal grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
especially her history. I think my mom's side of the family is just way less, I hate to say this, trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Like my mom tells me my great grandfather was a 7'4" guy. Like
Yeah.
she tells me all these stories. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't believe
Yeah.
it. I hate to say that, but I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that time, you know, there's so many orphans running around. Like it was in the wartime and immediately after. And thankfully, my mom's written a story about her life, so I know a lot about my mom.
Mm-hmm.
But I really don't know that much about my grandma.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah, at least history-wise, I don't know much other than like Baengnyeongdo is where she was for a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know again, living with her growing up, I always felt so bad because I, you know, couldn't really communicate with her that well. And in hindsight, I think I was very kind of a spoiled kid. I'll say I was like not grateful as a kid growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can say I'm deeply grateful now in hindsight. So
I when was it that she moved to the US?
it would have been 86, 1986,
86.
maybe 87. Yeah.
Wow. It's like it's a time where Korean people couldn't even fly outside of Korea without the government's permission.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
In the mid late 80s?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, a very drastic decision that she made.
You know, the crazy thing is, for the last, let's see, what, 90, for the last like 25-ish years of her life, she never went back.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't know why.
Uh,
You know, maybe the plane trip is too difficult. She also, right, she like literally never spent money.
uh-huh.
She would work, babysitting, getting Social Security, other things like that once she became a citizen.
Mm.
But that would just go 100% donated to the church.
Mm.
So maybe it's like a cost factor. She didn't want to waste money flying back to Korea.
Mm.
The thing is, I'm sure there's so much more, like there must be a reason she didn't come back,
Mm.
right? But I'll
Mm.
just never know.
Mm.
And I think that's the part that kind of kills me.
Mm.
But yeah, because we have this platform, I will say, if anyone listening has any connection to Baengnyeongdo, please, please, please reach out. Like I would love to connect and talk with you. Yeah.
Mm. My mother's side grandmother also, because both of my parents were working,
Yeah.
she was the one who always was at my home.
Mhm.
She almost it was like a commuter. She came in.
Oh, she didn't live with you guys.
She
Like she
didn't.
did commute for that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So most of the meals that I ate growing up was from my grandmother.
She cooked.
Yeah. One memory that I have of my mother's side grandmother, she's still alive,
Mm.
living with my parents. But
Yeah.
so, cause my mom's sister lives in Florida,
Yeah.
there was this year where the whole family flew to Florida,
Mm.
and then we did like a grand tour of Florida.
Yeah.
And then at one point we went to Disney World,
Uh-huh.
and then she brought like this huge ice box filled with food, and
And
had like,
drinks probably. Yeah.
and the drinks were like shike that she made.
Wow.
And I don't know why. Now thinking about it in hindsight, I am like so amazed by the effort and energy and like the kindness and love that she put into making that food.
Yeah.
But young me, I thought like I was kind of embarrassed.
Embarrassed, right?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
we were in
Yeah.
line,
Yeah.
and then like no one was doing that. We ate like this weird drink that no one really knew.
Yeah.
I was like, can't we just eat in the restaurant,
Yeah, get
right?
pizza,
Yeah.
get soda.
But
Yeah.
now that I think about it, it's so much work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a lot of stories I don't have time to share.
Hmm.
But yeah, growing up, I was very frequently embarrassed by my grandmother.
Hmm.
And it was, in hindsight, just like, yeah, so heartbreaking in a sense.
Hmm.
Because I think grandmothers know it, right? They know that they're embarrassing their kids. But, maybe they don't know any other way or yeah, they just take it, right?
Hmm.
Like I never once got chastised for it,
Hmm.
which maybe I should have. But, whether it was laying like they would try peppers on the driveway. I don't did I share this? I had to pee in basically a giant bucket
Hmm.
because she wanted to use that as fertilizer for the plants, right? Like that's how I grew up.
Yeah.
And yeah, in hindsight, again, it was at the time I remember just being so deeply embarrassed.
Hmm.
But now it's just like no, it's like that's what she grew up with.
Hmm.
That was her culture. I should not be embarrassed by it. So, yeah.
Do you know this Korean movie called Chiburo? It's a story about a young
Uh-huh.
grandchild living with a grandmother.
I'm pretty sure I watched this and I just
It's
cried the whole
called The Way
time.
Home.
Yeah, okay. Dude, that movie was like game over for me. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And very close to home. So
Mm.
Anyway, I feel very embarrassed. I wish I could have read that without crying so much. Maybe if I had read it before this June, I would have
Mm.
been like ready for it.
No, I don't believe
I think so. But
that.
I haven't read this. How long has it been? 2008, 2018. It's been 18 years.
How did you go through it in the actual event?
I wasn't that sad when it happened. Yeah.
Really? Oh.
I think it was I felt a lot like I even said in my post, I felt very at peace, not sad, very, I knew, in my faith, right? I know she's in a better place. And yeah, she had lived such a long good life, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, yeah. Sometimes I do wish she could have at least met my wife, met my kids, but that's okay.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah. Anything before we close, June, about, that generation? Like,
Mm.
I feel so an overwhelming sense of loss thinking, like, as that generation passes on,
Mhm.
we're losing so much history and wisdom
Mm.
that they went through, right? Because definitely Korea after, like, I don't know, let's say the 60s. Maybe this is not for me to say,
Mm.
because I know there were dictatorships and a lot of hardship too. But in my mind, compared to like Japanese occupation and the Korean War, right, that generation who lived through that is totally made different
Mhm.
and must have like such a different perspective on life and like so much wisdom to be taught.
Mm.
So to me, it's just so sad
Mm.
thinking about all that being lost.
Mm.
But yeah,
I think it's even more unique to Korea because Korea went through such a radical change in a very short time, right? And
yeah,
there are very few countries that went through that kind of turbulence
mhm,
and like look and to the place where we are at now. And so I sometimes think that maybe in a country level we have to have like put in extra effort to preserve this.
mhm,
And I think they're doing it some way,
yeah,
but yeah, like even the places like you describe how Shingumo has become such a different place
yeah,
now, right?
totally.
Like
Mhm,
physically, because I know that physical like places are like very strong anchors of memories, right?
mhm.
And so if that disappears, I think the whole nation as a collective memory, they're gonna have a big loss. Yeah.
One thought I just had, I know we do have to hard stop
Mm,
6,
mm,
but we'll wrap up with this. When I go to my grandma's house and like see how she lives,
mhm,
I don't think it's changed in 50 years.
mhm,
But just like maybe 10 years later, I feel
mhm,
like that generation of Halmonis is a little different.
mhm,
Maybe not 10, maybe like 30. Yeah, so maybe this is dumb, but I wonder like where that line is,
Hmm.
right? Like if you were born, my grandma was born, what did I say, 1923 was it? No, 1925. Yeah, if you're born in 1925 or 1935 or 1945,
They're
like
all the same.
I'm saying like where at some point it changes,
Hmm.
right? Because I look at some Halmonis I see around, maybe they're late 60s, early 70s. They don't evoke any of that like old school Korean mentality at all.
Mm.
And yet I look at my grandma at the very least. She knows zero modern luxuries.
Mm.
Right? Like it's not that she can't afford to,
Hmm.
but her bath until like very recently,
Hmm.
no shower. Like she just filled up a bucket and poured it over her head. Like
Hmm.
that's how she showered.
Hmm.
And I wonder if there's some line at which like that generation is different from another with regards to like how they modernize or
Hmm.
how open they are
Hmm.
to modern Korea, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. But anyway, it's just
Probably the something that happened during the 70s
70s, you
is
think?
when the most rapid growth happened
Yeah.
and culturally it became very different.
So in the 70s, she would have been what, 50 years old.
Yeah.
So maybe if you're like 30
Yeah.
at that point, it's
Hmm.
different than if
Yeah.
you're 50.
Hmm.
Anyway, this was my best attempt, June, to try to honor and preserve their life. So,
It was I don't know these people, I never met them, but like the way that you described, especially your mother's side grandmother, right? It I very resonated with that because I think I lived a pretty similar life with my Halmoni. I don't know. I didn't build up like that much of an attachment, emotional attachment with her like you did,
yeah.
but I can see what the relationship was like and what their lives were like. So, thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Harmony. Oh,
Thank you all, Halmonis.
we should do our best to live good lives. Okay, that's it. Can you do the
Yeah.
outro?
Oh, I never tried this. Okay. Daniel can't do the outro. Thank you for listening. We don't have a lot of episodes left, so please stay with us until the very end. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.